They said, "Just wait in the lounge, Grandma, we'll be back." I waited 3 hours, then opened the envelope in my purse. The tickets weren't for me, but they have no idea the deed in my bag wasn't for them. They wheeled me through the airport like I was a carry on someone regretted bringing. Miller pushed the chair with one hand and scrolled his phone with the other, never once looking down at me. Rosa walked ahead, dragging a suitcase she refused to let me touch, her heels clicking sharp against the polished tile. My granddaughter trailed behind, earbuds in, chewing something she never offered to share. "Seriously?" Rosa muttered to Miller as we approached the VIP lounge. "If she slips on ice, we'll have to FedEx her back in a box." They laughed. I did not blink. I kept my eyes straight ahead, fixed on the frosted glass door that opened into the lounge, a space they had not taken me to in years, not since Miller made partner and started flying business class. Inside, the air smelled like cologne and cold furniture. A hostess greeted us with a gentle smile, but her eyes flickered when she saw me. Old, small, bundled in a coat I had owned since before Rosa joined this family. She must have wondered why they brought me. "She'll be waiting here," Miller said, not to me but to the hostess. "We'll need access for about 30 minutes. They sat me near the window, facing the runway. Rosa handed me a paper cup of coffee, too hot to drink, and a small envelope that said, "Safe travels," in swirling, childish font. "Here," she said with a smile that was all lips and no eyes. "A little something to keep you company." Then she kissed the air near my temple and turned away. The envelope was light. I opened it with stiff fingers. Inside were 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it slowly, though I already knew it was not a ticket. The note read, "You're not really coming. Enjoy the coffee, maybe read a magazine. You'll be more useful here. Don't call, don't wait." Outside the glass, a plane taxied toward the sky. Behind me, I heard the granddaughter whisper to her phone, giggling. "She smells like mothballs and regret," she said, Rosa added. "And she thinks she's still in charge? Adorable." I took a sip of the coffee. It burned. I drank it anyway. They left without saying goodbye. 3 pairs of footsteps, 2 adult, 1 adolescent, tapped away, fading down the corridor. The silence they left behind was not peaceful. It was intentional. 3 hours passed. The coffee turned cold. I did not call. I did not ask for help. I sat, still as stone, while the sun shifted across the glass, casting shadows across my lap. In my purse, I carried 2 things of value. A photograph of my granddaughter at 3 years old, missing a tooth and holding a daisy, and a small manila folder that Miller and Rosa never asked about. I opened it now, careful not to crinkle the edges. The original deed to the house was inside, freshly stamped. The new owner listed was no longer me. It was a non-profit, the Grandmother's Endowment for Ecological Justice. The transfer date? 3 weeks ago. My birthday, the same day Rosa forgot to call because she was overwhelmed with work. The same day Miller sent a generic e-card that read, "Hope you're enjoying retirement," and nothing else. I had spent that morning alone, baking lemon cookies and placing them in neat rows on a tray, just in case someone showed up. No one did, but that afternoon, I had taken the deed to my lawyer. His name was Thomas. He used to live 3 houses down when he was a boy. I taught him how to tie a tourniquet when he skinned his knee on my front steps. Now he wore suits, spoke in contracts, and had tears in his eyes when he read what I wanted done. "I'll do it," he said. "You deserve this." Now I held his promise in my hands. The deed, legally signed. The house, no longer theirs to take. No longer mine either, but it would shelter others like me. Women too old to scream, too tired to fight, but not too broken to remember. I folded the folder and placed it back into my purse. I zipped it closed. A flight attendant passed by, offering shortbread cookies. I declined. Another hour passed. The lounge staff changed shifts. The woman who had welcomed me was gone, replaced by a young man with gelled hair and polite discomfort. He approached me once, asked if I was waiting for someone. I smiled and said no. Then I turned back to the window. Out there, a new flight was taking off. Its lights blinked against the darkening sky. Inside me, something steadier than rage took root. They thought I was luggage, unclaimed, unimportant, forgettable. But luggage gets lost. I do not. They thought I was an afterthought, something you leave behind to make room for leg space and duty-free shopping. but I am the last thing they will ever unpack. I looked at my reflection in the glass. Wrinkles, gray hair, eyes like steel. I had delivered 73 babies in my lifetime. I had slept on military cots, patched up wounds, and buried a husband I did not cry for. They thought this lounge, this abandonment was an ending. It was not. It was page one, and they, so sure of their departure, had no idea that the house they called theirs was already gone. I whispered to my reflection, not loud, not bitter, just clear. They think I am excess baggage, but I am the one thing they cannot carry, cannot bury, cannot leave behind. Then I stood up. It was time to go home. I was 23 when I delivered my first baby under mortar fire. We were stationed outside Da Nang. The mother was 19, scared out of her mind, and the tent was shaking with every distant boom. I told her to breathe. She did. The baby came out screaming, fists clenched like he already knew the world would not be kind. By the time I returned to the States, I had delivered nearly 100 children, each one a miracle, each one a reminder that even in war, life insists on itself. They offered me citizenship in Germany afterward, a stable position in a post-war hospital, full benefits. I declined. The miller was 6 years old. He had not seen me in 2 years. My mother sent me a photograph, him standing next to a birthday cake, candles unlit, his face solemn. I came home. I chose him. I scrubbed hospital floors during the day and worked night shifts in maternity wards. I sewed his Halloween costumes by hand and packed his lunches with napkins that said, "Be brave." He never asked me where the money came from, how the bills were paid. He just lived. I just worked. When he brought Rosa home, I smiled. She had the kind of beauty that made people pause, the lashes, the lipstick, the way she never touched a doorknob without a tissue. Miller was enchanted. I kept my thoughts to myself. She was already 7 months pregnant on their wedding day, waddling in white lace, glowing with discomfort. When her labor came early, it was me, not the midwife she had hired, who caught the baby in our kitchen. She was hemorrhaging. I held my hand against her womb and whispered, "You're not dying here." I stayed awake for 2 days to monitor her. I washed the sheets in silence. She never mentioned it again. They named the baby Sarah. I called her Sunshine. She used to crawl into my lap with her books and whisper secrets into my scarf. I saved every crayon drawing she gave me, tucked them into a box labeled Hope. When Miller was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I moved into their guest room. Rosa called it temporary. It became permanent. I kept him alive, bone broth, leg massages, medication charts. Rosa posted quotes. I stayed awake. He recovered. The doctors called it rare. He called it nothing. "Mom, the TV in the guest room buzzes. Can you fix it?" I fixed it. When I gave them the house, I thought I was giving them peace, a stable roof, a future. "It's yours," I said, signing the papers, my hands trembling. "Consider it a wedding gift." Rosa smiled, all teeth. "That's so generous of you." Miller nodded. "You'll always have a place here." But slowly my place became smaller. First it was the pictures. I noticed mine vanished from the living room shelf. Then my knitting basket was moved to the garage. Then my food was labeled in the fridge, like I was a tenant, not a mother. Rosa began complaining about smells. "That soup you make, it's pungent." She lit candles in every room. She sprayed perfume on the couch after I sat. "She is getting forgetful," she told Sarah. "Do not let her help with your homework. It is better if she just rests." I heard her on the phone one night, laughing with a friend. "That old bat is just here so we look like we care." I did not confront her. I did not cry. I simply folded the laundry tighter. Miller said less and less to me as months passed. Work, stress, distractions. I asked him once, softly, "Do you remember when you were 10 and had a fever of 104? I stayed up for 3 days with you." He shrugged. "That was a long time ago, Mom. So was Vietnam. But I remember it like it was this morning." I kept a photo of baby Sarah in my wallet. Not the teenager she had become, the baby, fresh from the bath, with soap behind her ears, and a gummy smile that made me believe the world was still good. Now she barely acknowledged me. Rosa had told her I was fragile, outdated, a bit off. They did not yell. They did not hit. But they erased me, inch by inch, until all that was left was a chair in the corner and the sound of my own breath. Still, I made her lunch for school. Still, I folded his shirts. Still, I scrubbed the bathroom tiles while they called themselves busy. And when the time came for the trip to Antarctica, I packed my own bag, even though they never asked me to, because I knew before they said a word. The idea of Antarctica was Rosa's. She made it sound glamorous. Once in a lifetime. A cruise past the glaciers, maybe even see penguins up close, she had said, her voice rising like she was auditioning for a commercial. Miller nodded absently, scrolling through his tablet. Sarah's off school that week. It could be good for all of us. They spoke as if I were part of all of us. I smiled faintly and said nothing. Weeks passed. They discussed flights and cabins, excursion gear, even which coat Miller should buy for the cold. No one asked if I had a passport. No one asked if I needed help packing. I offered, once, to sew thermal linings into Sarah's mittens. Rosa replied, "Oh, they make better ones now, factory sealed." Thanks, though. I began to sense the shape of the exclusion long before it was named. One evening, as they laughed over dinner reservations in Ushuaia, Rosa leaned across the table, wine-glazed and smug, and said, "Well, at least we'll have more legroom. Leave the fossil behind." She giggled, glancing at Miller, who chuckled behind his napkin. I looked at the flickering candle between us. "You mean me?" I asked softly. She waved her hand. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It's just an expression." I nodded. Then I cleared their dishes. That night, I checked the safe in the upstairs closet. I kept it behind a row of unused coats, my coats, now shoved into the shadows. The manila folder that once held the house deed was missing. I searched carefully, methodically. A mother learns to look without panicking. A soldier learns to inventory the damage before reporting it. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table while Rosa poured her smoothie. "Rosa," I said gently, "have you seen the folder I keep in the safe upstairs? The one with the house documents?" She froze for just a second. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Oh," she said, rinsing the blender too loudly. "You probably moved it yourself and forgot. Happens all the time. Memory's tricky these days, huh? I smiled back. "Yes, very tricky." I waited until they left for a planning meeting at the travel agency. Then I called Thomas. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Collins?" "Leah," I corrected. "It has been too long." He was 37 now. The last time I saw him, he was a teenager crying in my kitchen after his mother hit him with a wooden spoon. I had patched his chin and told him he would be someone important. He had hugged me hard and said, "Someday, I will help you back." That day had come. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. He wore a navy blue blazer, no tie. His hands were strong, his face kind. "I need your help," I said. He did not ask why. He listened as I laid it out, the shift in tone at home, the missing deed, the trip that excluded me, the jokes that cut deep. I told him I wanted to transfer ownership of the house, not to Miller, not to Rosa, but to something that could never betray me. "A nonprofit," I said, "something stable, something that can carry my name without erasing me." He nodded slowly. "Do you have one in mind?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I had been assembling quietly for months. Articles about women's shelters, notes on ecological literacy programs, printouts of grant structures. "Call it," I said, "the Grandmother's Endowment for Ecological Justice. Let it be a haven for women like me, for the ones who were erased, belittled, discarded." Thomas read through my notes. "You want it used as a research center, a safe space?" "A little of both," I said. "A place for plants and people to grow back, especially the ones thought to be past their bloom." He smiled, but there were tears in his eyes. "I think that's the most beautiful clause I have ever heard. I want it airtight," I added, "untransferable. If anyone tries to sell it or profit from it, the deed reverts to the state. Make it ironclad." "It will be," he promised. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers with steady hands. Thomas filed everything under the radar, at my request. The house would be listed in the name of the foundation, with me as honorary steward until death or abdication. Rosa and Miller would not receive notification until it was far too late to contest. In the meantime, I made dinner, I ironed shirts, I packed Sarah's lunch. I watched them print cruise itineraries and argue over how many layers to bring. I stood beside them at breakfast, I smiled during family photos. but inside I had already left. And when the plane door would close behind them, so too would every illusion they had that this house, my house, was ever truly theirs. The taxi driver was quiet. He did not ask questions, only helped with my bag and opened the door with a gentle nod. I sat in the back seat with my purse clutched tightly in my lap, the manila folder still zipped inside. Outside the window, the city blurred, a gray smear of lights and silence. I did not look back at the airport. We passed their house, my house, for the last time under their illusion. The porch light was still on, left out of habit or carelessness. I did not flinch. When I arrived home, the door greeted me with a firm lock. The placard had already been placed, property of the Grandmother's Endowment for Ecological Justice. The name was etched into polished brass, discreet but unmistakable. Below it, a small sticker bore the words, "Protected, registered, irrevocable." Thomas had seen to every detail. The locks had been changed that morning. The city clerk's office had processed the title transfer without a hitch. A discreet notice had been filed with the local court. Ownership now rested in the hands of a non-profit with no familial ties. The property was sealed, pending reclassification. Inside, the house no longer felt like theirs. The kitchen had been deep cleaned. Their personal items, perfume bottles, novelty mugs, the framed print that said "Live, Laugh, Love," had been boxed and stored by a discreet third-party service. The basement had been cleared to make space for incoming resource shelves. The old guest room was now a quiet office, already furnished with files labeled Founding Documents, Volunteer Interest, and Elder Women's Rights. I made tea, not out of celebration, but clarity. The kind of tea you drink when you realize your hands are still steady after betrayal. Jasmine. No sugar. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, folded neatly, slid under the front door. The handwriting was shaky, the ink slightly smudged. It came from Mrs. Halverson, the woman who lived 2 doors down. Dear Mrs. Collins, I have watched them mock you in the yard, call you names I will not repeat. Once I heard Rosa shout that you were useless. I regret not speaking up sooner. If you ever need someone to testify on your behalf, I will. Women like you built this street. It is time we said that out loud. With respect, Clara Halverson. I placed the letter in a drawer marked Affirmations. It joined 2 others that arrived in the following days, both from neighbors I had thought indifferent. Meanwhile, Rosa discovered her access to the joint bank account had been revoked. She called the bank in a fury, demanded they fix the glitch. But there was no glitch. I had been a co-owner since the account's creation. Her name had always been secondary. With Thomas's guidance, I had enacted my full rights and locked the account until further notice. She emailed me once, short, venomous, "You'll regret this. Sarah will be traumatized. You're sabotaging your own family." I did not respond. Instead, I opened my first community workshop at the local senior center. The room was modest. Folding chairs, dusty windows, a pot of coffee that had seen better days. But the women who came carried stories heavier than mine. I did not stand behind a podium. I sat among them and passed around printouts labeled Basic Legal Rights for Elder Women. We discussed power of attorney. We talked about inheritance laws. We spoke, quietly at first, then louder, about emotional theft, one woman cried, as she described being moved into her son's garage just until we remodel. That was 3 years ago. Another whispered that her daughter-in-law had told her to stop buying groceries because you're not contributing enough to make decisions. I nodded through all of it, not as a savior, just as someone who had made it through the fire and still remembered the heat. Word spread slowly, the way good things do. No ads, no influencers, just one woman calling another, saying, she understands. By the 3rd week, we had 15 regulars. By the 6th, 30. A retired librarian offered to catalog our materials. A former court clerk volunteered to teach a class on restraining orders and conservatorships. A bakery down the street donated bread rolls every Tuesday. We named ourselves quietly, the Endowment Circle. Every session began the same way. I would say, "This space belongs to no one and everyone. You are not forgotten. You are not too late." I did not speak of Rosa, or Miller, or the house. I did not need to. The women around me were my answer. And in the silence of those afternoons, filled with the sound of pens scratching, paper passing, breath being held then released, I felt something I had not felt in years. Vindication, not vengeance. A slap not shouted, but whispered. The kind that leaves a mark, not on the cheek, but on the conscience. They arrived home late in the afternoon, dragging dusty luggage up the stone path, sunglasses still perched on their foreheads as if the sun were still following them. Miller went for his keys first, patting his coat, then his jeans pocket, then turning with furrowed brows toward Rosa. "Did you change the locks before we left?" he asked, rattling the doorknob. Rosa blinked at him. "Why would I change the locks? You had the keys." He jiggled them again. Nothing. The door stood firm. That was when Sarah noticed the brass plaque mounted cleanly on the gate, right above the mailbox where my hands had dropped thousands of letters over the years. Property of the Grandmother's Endowment for Ecological Justice. Authorized use only. Sarah read it aloud, her voice thin. Rosa stepped back, color draining from her face. What the hell is this?" Miller pulled out his phone. "It's probably a mistake, a clerical thing. I'll call someone." Sarah pressed her hand to the glass and peered in. "All the furniture's moved," she whispered. "The pictures are gone. Even the ugly vase Grandma liked." Rosa's voice sharpened. "This is absurd. It's our house." Miller called the police. He used the calm, firm tone he reserved for customer service lines and airline complaints. "Yes, I need to report a possible break-in at my residence." They waited by the curb, shivering slightly now that the sun had dipped behind the trees. The suitcases sat like orphaned dogs by their feet. When the patrol car pulled up, 2 officers stepped out, one older, one fresh-faced. The senior approached, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the plaque on the gate. "This your residence?" he asked. "Yes," Rosa snapped. "We just returned from overseas and someone has clearly—" The officer raised a hand gently. "Ma'am, we ran the property deed when the call came in. This house is registered to a nonprofit foundation. It was legally transferred over a month ago. There's no record of your names on the current title." Miller stiffened. "That's not possible. My mother lives here." The officer nodded. "She did. But she's listed as the transitional steward of the property, not an owner." "What does that even mean?" Rosa barked. "It means," said a new voice, low and steady, "that you no longer live here." They turned in unison. I stood behind the lace curtain of the front window, the one Rosa had once called tacky. I pushed it aside and opened the door with care. Rosa's mouth dropped. "You're supposed to be at the airport." "I was," I said, stepping outside, the air cool on my cheeks. "Then I came home." Sarah stepped forward, eyes glossy with confusion. "Grandma, we thought you'd be gone by now. We needed a vacation." I looked at her gently. "And now you have a permanent one. From this house, and from the heart that built it." Miller stared at me like I was a ghost. "You did this?" I nodded once. "I protected what was mine, and what was never yours to steal." Rosa lunged toward the steps, eyes wild. "You ungrateful? After everything we've done for you?" The younger officer moved between us. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remain on the sidewalk." Rosa screamed, not with fear, but with disbelief. The kind of scream someone makes when the narrative they wrote crumbles in their hands. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "You'll die alone in that empty house." I tilted my head. "I have more company now than I ever did with you in it." Miller stepped forward, voice trembling. "Mom, please, let's just talk. You could have told me." "Told you?" I echoed. "Like the way you told me you were recovering from cancer, then asked me to wash your socks and empty your bedpan without ever once saying thank you? Like the way you told me this house was still my home, right before laughing when she called me a fossil?" He looked down. "I was always quiet," I continued, "and you mistook that for weakness. But silence is not the same as surrender." Sarah wiped her nose. Can I get my books? My laptop is inside." I nodded. "You may take what belongs to you. A representative from the foundation will supervise. Everything else stays." The older officer offered to assist. I stayed on the porch while Sarah and the officer disappeared into what had once been her room. Rosa paced like a caged animal. "You can't just do this. There will be consequences. Legal consequences." I folded my hands. "The law knows. I made sure of it. The transfer is final. The locks are changed. The utilities are in the foundation's name. The taxes are prepaid. You are yelling at a brick wall." Sarah emerged 10 minutes later with a small duffel. She did not meet my eyes. That was all right. Some things take time. Miller put his arm around her. Rosa stood frozen, staring at the front door like it had personally betrayed her. I stepped back inside, but before I closed the door, I added, "This house will now serve women like me, forgotten, silenced, dismissed. They will sit where you sat, but with respect. They will sleep where you mocked me, and they will rest. That is the only legacy this place will carry now." And then I shut the door. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. Rosa filed the lawsuit 3 days after the door closed in her face. The paperwork was hurried, angry, an attempt to unravel what she claimed was elder manipulation, coercion, and sudden cognitive decline. Her attorney filed a petition to freeze the property transfer, citing familial misconduct, but the judge did not flinch. The case was reviewed, the documentation verified. Every dotted I and crossed T stood firm. The transfer was not sudden, it was not secretive, it was signed, witnessed, and legally processed with full cognitive clarity. Leah Collins was of sound mind, verified by 2 doctors and a notarized interview conducted prior to the deed's submission. Thomas, my lawyer and my former patient in a far different life, stood before the court with quiet confidence. The only manipulation at play here, he told the judge, was the emotional erasure of a woman whose silence was mistaken for consent. The motion was dismissed in less than 20 minutes. Rosa's name would never appear on the deed again. The news spread faster than I expected. A local journalist caught wind of the court ruling after a clerk, whose grandmother had just joined our community circle, mentioned my story. The headline hit the town paper 2 days later. "War hero grandma reclaims dignity from ungrateful family." The photo accompanying the article showed me standing at the community center's front steps, surrounded by women in sweaters and sneakers, their arms linked, faces unashamed. Inside the article, the story was simple. Retired military nurse, longtime caregiver, gave her home not to her children, but to a foundation protecting elder women. The final line read, "She did not raise her voice, she raised the standard." The article was shared more times than I could count. The senior center printed it and taped it to the doors. Someone mailed me a laminated copy, wrapped in purple ribbon. I kept it beside my tea tins. A week later, the National Alliance for Elder Rights invited me to speak at their fall conference. The theme, "Justice Doesn't Expire." I wore a navy blue blouse with silver buttons, the same one I wore the day I retired from the hospital. The auditorium held almost 200 people, caregivers, legal advocates, adult children who had once ignored their parents but now came searching for redemption. I did not use a microphone. I simply stepped forward and began. They called me a burden, a fossil, a mistake that wouldn't disappear. But I was none of those things. I was the one who remembered everything they forgot. I told them about the safe, the envelope, the coffee that burned my tongue, the way they laughed without turning around. I told them about the house, about the manila folder, about the joyless duty that replaced love. But I also told them about the quiet, the way it can cradle you when screaming no longer matters, the way dignity lives not in revenge, but in reclamation. They stood when I finished, not with applause, but with stillness, the kind that means someone truly heard you. After the talk, letters came, hundreds, some typed, some handwritten, in careful script, most from women, some from men, a few from teenagers who had read about me on their grandmother's fridge. "Thank you for saying what my mother never could. I thought I was the only one. You are the reason I finally left. Phoebe took everything, but now I know I am not alone." One envelope contained a child's drawing of a house with flowers around it. Above the roof, in large crayon letters, it read, "Grandma's Place Forever." I pinned it above my desk. Rosa, meanwhile, did not go quietly. She gave 2 interviews, both poorly received. She spoke of family betrayal, of mental decline, of a woman who was clearly manipulated. But the internet is less forgiving than memory. Viewers dug through her public records, finding inconsistencies. That was when the Department of Social Services opened an investigation. Turns out, Rosa had filed for dependent care tax credits using my name long after the deed was transferred. She had also received state elder care stipends under a caregiving program, claiming to be my sole provider, even while I was running legal workshops and making public appearances. The audit came quickly. Her accounts were frozen. Her employer quietly suspended her without comment. A neighbor told me she screamed at the mailbox when the subpoena arrived. I did not cheer. I did not gloat. I poured tea and watched the rain. Miller tried once more to call, left a voicemail that began, "Mom, I just want to understand." I deleted it without listening to the rest. Understanding was always available to him. He just chose convenience. Sarah's name never came up during the legal storm. She disappeared from social media. I heard from a friend of a friend that she withdrew from school mid-semester. Whether in shame or rebellion, I did not know. I hoped she was thinking, that was enough for now. Meanwhile, our circle grew. We held Thursday sessions in the old house, now repurposed as a resource library and quiet sanctuary. The front room still had its fireplace. We placed a rocking chair beside it. The plaque above the mantel read, "This home was not given, it was reclaimed." And beneath that, in smaller letters, for every woman told she was too late. We lit a candle each meeting, one for every story that found its voice, one for every woman who walked back into the house she was told she did not belong in, and stayed. The apartment was small, but the windows were large and the walls were quiet. I shared the space with two other women, Marcy, who had been widowed since Reagan was president, and June, who made the best apple pie I had ever tasted, despite forgetting her oven mitts half the time. We lived like sisters who had never known each other in youth, but recognized something familiar in each other's silence. We kept a shared calendar on the fridge, marked with movie nights, bingo Tuesdays, and a red circle every Thursday, rights class. I taught it myself. It started with just 3 women from the endowment circle, seated around a folding table with chipped corners. I printed handouts from a borrowed copier. The first session was titled, Basic Legal Rights for Older Women. We went over wills, healthcare proxies, guardianship laws. No one interrupted. They wrote things down like students who finally understood the language being spoken. By the 3rd week, the table was full. We had women coming from neighboring counties, arriving with tote bags and thermoses, faces lit with cautious hope. Some came in silence, others came with stories. The adult son who moved his mother into the garage just until the kitchen remodel, the daughter who blocked her mother from using the thermostat, the granddaughter who told her grandmother she owed her college tuition. They spoke, I listened. We all healed a little. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from the market to find Sarah sitting on the bench by the front stoop. She was older than I remembered, or perhaps just worn around the edges. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes rimmed in red. She stood when she saw me. "Hi, Grandma." I nodded but said nothing. "I saw it," she whispered. "Every time they mocked you. I thought, if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't be like them. But silence made me worse." I unlocked the door slowly. "You saw it." She flinched. "I was a kid." "You were 16, I said, "old enough to have a voice, old enough to hear me cry through the wall." Tears spilled freely now. "I am sorry." I looked at her, not coldly, but not kindly either. I had waited too long for kindness that never came. "Silence is not neutral," I said. "You watched them hurt me and said nothing. That too is a choice." She covered her mouth and nodded. Can I make it right?" "There is no undoing," I said gently. "But there is doing better. That is still something. You can start." And she did. Week after week. Not to earn forgiveness, but to learn how never to be like them again. She came to one class, then another. She sat in the back, took notes, asked questions. Once, she volunteered to help pass out handouts. I let her. That spring, the Women's Advocacy Network hosted their annual Legacy and Light Awards, a ceremony for women over 60 who had impacted their communities in lasting, meaningful ways. I did not know I had been nominated. On the night of the event, I was called up without warning. The auditorium dimmed. A voice read my story. Not the version Rosa would have told, but the real one. A woman who gave birth to hundreds, but was nearly erased by the family she raised. A woman who turned pain into purpose and silence into structure. When I stepped onto the stage, I saw a familiar face in the front row. Ellie, my daughter. She stood, tears on her cheeks, and clapped harder than anyone else in the room. Beside her, a boy in his early 20s, held a canvas wrapped in gold ribbon. Jacob, my grandson. Ellie approached the podium with him. She took the microphone and said, "I left when I was young because I thought I had to, but I never stopped needing you." Then she turned to me and unwrapped the canvas. It was a painting, simple watercolor, but it stopped my breath. I was standing in the middle of a garden, my garden, the one I planted from seed after Miller moved out. Behind me stood rows of women, their faces wrinkled, proud, each one holding something, books, banners, hands, and beneath the painting, in neat print, it read, "You are my real mom, not just Grandma." Jacob handed me the frame. "You gave her life," he said, voice shaking. "Then you gave it back." I could not speak. I only held it close, the way I once held Miller when he had night terrors, the way I once held Sarah when she skinned her knee, the way I had wished someone would one day hold me. The audience rose in unison. A standing ovation not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been told she was only useful if she stayed quiet. That night we walked home slowly. Ellie held my hand. Jacob carried the painting like it was made of glass. Sarah texted that she would join us for lunch the next day. Marcy baked lemon bars. June cried for a solid 15 minutes, then asked if we could watch Murder, She Wrote. Life did not restart. It continued, but softer, bald brighter, as if the wick I thought had gone out had simply been waiting for the right match. And now, the flame had returned. Rosa vanished the way a stone does when thrown into a pond, quick, sharp, and silent. No splash, just ripples of scandal. After the investigation into her fraudulent caregiving claims, her social media accounts disappeared. Her name was quietly removed from a local charity board. A friend of mine saw her working part-time at a boutique out of town, wearing sunglasses indoors and refusing to speak unless absolutely necessary. Miller fared little better. His employer found the headlines too uncomfortable to ignore. He was let go, without prejudice, but not without whispers. The same colleagues who once toasted him at board dinners now crossed the street to avoid small talk. His reputation, built on curated success and borrowed virtue, crumbled under the weight of a single truth. He had forsaken the woman who built his foundation. He came to see me once. It was raining that afternoon. I heard the knock, slow and reluctant. I opened the door to find him standing beneath the awning. Thinner than I remembered, his coat soaked through. "Mom," he said. I did not speak. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I studied his face, the same face I once wiped fever from, the same jaw I kissed goodnight for 17 years, now slack, now reaching for something he never earned. "You had years to say sorry," I said calmly. "You chose silence." He swallowed hard. I didn't know what to say. "You had every word," I replied. "You just chose yourself." I did not invite him in. He did not ask. He left the same way he came, unresolved, unnoticed by the world, but heavy with the weight of consequence. Weeks later, Ellie showed up at my door with a suitcase and a smile. "I booked the trip," she said. "We're going to Antarctica." We flew from Boston to Buenos Aires, then onward to Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world. From there, we boarded a research vessel that cut through icy waters like a needle through silk. Every morning, the sky stretched endless, and every night, we watched the aurora bleed across the dark, like a promise kept. She held my hand the night we stepped onto the ice. The air bit at our cheeks, but I had never breathed more freely. "This was supposed to be your trip," she whispered. "Years ago," I shook my head. "No, this was always ours." Back home, the house, my old house, their once claimed inheritance, had become a sanctuary. We called it the Hearth, a library of resilience, a home for workshops, poetry readings, grief circles, even small garden therapy sessions in the back. The door stayed open during the day. The kettle was always warm. We hosted a community event each solstice. It became our ritual, light for the longest night, warmth for the coldest days. That winter, I organized a memorial, not for someone who had died, but for someone who had died in my heart. It was Miller's name on the candle, not because I hated him, but because the grief had no other place to go. I needed to mourn the son I once knew, the boy who used to cry when scraped, the teenager who painted my Mother's Day card in crooked letters. Jacob helped me arrange the chairs. The room was quiet but not somber. There were no eulogies, only presence. We placed a photograph of Miller at the center, young, smiling, holding baby Sarah with uncertain hands. Each attendee held a candle. Ellie lit the first flame, then Jacob lit the next, then the next. Finally, Jacob stepped forward with the photograph and placed it in the center, encircled by soft flickering light. He turned to me, eyes wide, voice steady. "Grandma," he asked, "is bad gone forever?" The room held its breath. I touched his cheek, looked into the face of a new generation, one that had seen pain, yes, but also growth, regret, return. "Bad doesn't go," I said gently. "It waits, but so does love. So do we." The candles burned low. No one moved. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and soundless. Later that evening, as I sat by the fire with Ellie and Jacob, I found the words that had waited years to be spoken. "They left me at the airport," I said, voice quiet but firm. "But they came home to nowhere." Ellie nodded. "And you?" "I came home to myself." I looked at the hearth, at the flicker of embers reflecting in the window. "Justice didn't shout," I continued. "It stood." I breathed deeply. The room smelled of lemon tea and cedarwood. "So did I. Thank you for staying with me through the end of this story. If it made your heart ache, if it made you remember someone you once were, or someone you still are, then you are not alone. Too many women live their final chapters in silence, but here we write them differently. On Grandma, True Stories, we tell the truth that was buried. We give voice to the quietest woman in the room. And we remind the world, revenge doesn't need to scream. Sometimes, it just needs to outlive them. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. More voices are waiting to be heard, and yours might be next. Until then, remember, justice doesn't shout, it remembers. And so do we.